It's been a while. We one of the longest studies we did in CC was Romans, which we just finished up. Longest study before that was Genesis. I went back and found my notes. That was a year and 5 months in Genesis. So truly, Genesis forever. The study that we had done before Genesis was First and Second Samuel. I don't think that many people here were here during that, except for maybe William. We did cover the passage we're going to be in tonight, but I have. Were you here for that, William?
I came in. I came into that First Samuel 8 or 9. That's when I showed up.
So you were here for the whole Ekron incident.
Oh yes.
Perfect. Okay.
Oh yes.
Ekron 2015. Never forget. Okay. So. So the we're gonna be anybody who was here at the time, like, just feel free to zone out or don't, because I've actually, number one, rewrote this study because I lost my notes, and I've learned a decent amount about this passage since then, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to revisit it. We're going to be talking about an incident in David's life that was not a good incident. So before we start out, when you think of King David from the Old Testament, what do you think of? What springs to mind?
Man after God's own heart.
Yeah, what else? God's chosen. Yep.
Man of many mistakes.
Yeah. Wow, Bob. Bob and I come from very similar backgrounds. It's the Becker curriculum, guys.
I was gonna say, yeah. Cheers. Power to the veggies.
Yeah. What else do you think of David? Question is, what springs to mind when you think of David? What's the question? Kickster says a sinner like all of us. He did write the Psalms, Mandrake. Yep.
Not all of them.
Okay, he wrote many of them. True. Yeah, well, everybody's going back to the holes in the heads of giants. So, getting two themes, right? The warrior and the poet. So kind of the warrior poet archetype, right? The example of what it means to be both a fighter, a conqueror, a hard man, and also a lover, a poet, somebody who likes wisdom, that sort of thing. Chosen by God, a man after God's own heart. We'll say both those. Conqueror of Israel, because he did conquer Israel in the Civil War. Protector of Israel. Those are some things I had written down. Goat said a man of many mistakes. Somebody else said a sinner like all of us. Certainly. And the it's not funny. I was looking at the picture in chat. Sorry, distracted myself already. The thing we're going to be talking about tonight is that mistake that springs to mind, which is a significant mistake. From that, he could gain numerous other infamous titles, such as traitor, murderer, liar, adulterer, etc. So let us begin on this. Before we do that, let's remember that David is kind of held up as a good guy, if you will, in the Old Testament, because in First Kings, every king is kind of judged by David's standard. So this is somebody who was chosen by God, was a man after God's own heart. Obviously, somebody who is considered a righteous person, and yet he also falls hard. There's a phrase in Latin called corruptio optima pessima. All the West Wing fans are nodding right now. It means the corruption of the best is the worst. So that is what we see with David here tonight. So we'll talk about what kind of caused that corruption, how he went down that path, and then contrast it to one of his friends. All right, so I will get you that translation in text. But in the meantime, can I have a volunteer to read verses 1 through 6 of 2 Samuel 1 through 17?
2 Samuel 1 through 17, or just 1 through 6 first?
1 through 6.
In the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, ravage and besiege. Arab remained at Jerusalem. It happened one late afternoon when David arose from his couch on the roof of the king's house. He saw from the roof a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent and inquired about the woman. Oh boy! And one said, Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Elam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" And took her and with her self from her uncleanliness. Then she returned to her house. The woman conceived, and she was sent and told David, "I am pregnant." Sent a word to Joab, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." And Joab sent Uriah to David. That's your soap opera right now. I got the 6.
Thanks. Okay. Shh. Spoilers, Winged. Stop it. So,
As expressed, I was here for the first Samuel study. I'm sorry.
man, you pay attention. Holy cow. Okay, so when is this story set? Not a trick question. It's in the text. In the spring. Yep. Which is when the armies would go to war. Why would armies go to war in the spring? Go ahead, Kessa.
I was gonna say because the men wouldn't be busy with harvest.
Exactly. So, thing to remember about ancient warfare, you don't really have professional armies until arguably the Spartans at around 500 BC. This is definitely before that. So everybody's in the National Guard, if you will. So everybody has to go back to their farms and harvest things. So you fight when you're not harvesting, and you're not freezing, you're not doing things around the farm, if you will. So kind of got fit war in the schedule throughout the year. So spring is when they would fit war in the schedule. When you're not needed at the farm as much, you go out, you go fight the enemies, take their land. Then nice thing is when you conquer their land, you can plant your crops on their land, and then have extra harvest at the end. So yeah, it's when the people would fight because that's what they could fit in their schedules. So I've already seen you guys answering my next question, but I'll ask it anyways. Where does this story go off the tracks? At what point does David do wrong here? Go ahead, Cass.
Late one afternoon.
Okay. True. That is when the official sin begins, if you will. But is there blame to be had for David not going off to war?
Probably.
Stop it, Winged! So there's a decent amount of debate about this. And a lot of times people just kind of glance by it and be like, oh, it's kind of weird that it calls it out. Whenever it calls something out, generally it's important to the story. It doesn't just usually include random details. So let's dig into this a little bit. It says when kings went out to war, David didn't. When kings went out to war, David sent Joab and his men. Okay, so that it seems kind of odd, but maybe not super accusatory. So, what is the Hebrew word for king?
I am really hoping somebody remembers this.
Lady Youngworth was in Hebrew class with me, so I'm sure she's typing the answer. There she is. Yeah, Melech. Yep. Melech is the Hebrew word for king or ruler. But yeah, Melech. So, what is the Hebrew word for war?
As we're calling it, isn't it Malekma?
It is Melechma.
Paying attention, man.
Wow. Spot on. I am impressed, sir. I am impressed. I'll let you guys get past the mutual admiration society here. So the yeah, Melechma is the
Hang on.
Oh yeah.
I got you.
Thanks. Okay. Wait, what? There we go. Okay, so Melechma is the Hebrew word for war. So do you get does those Melech and Melechma? Does that sound a little familiar, a little similar to you guys at all? Maybe. Obviously, it does, right? There's one syllable different. Ma is the Hebrew word for what? So Melechma, the Hebrew word for war, is literally what kings do. So if you're reading this in the original Hebrew, the transliteration, the Nasby style, would be, when kings do what kings do, David sent Joab and his men. So for the original audience, they would read this and go, okay, David's already shirking his job, right? So there's a two-part failure here that I think leads to the sin. Obviously, we all know what the sin is. David goes and sleeps with the wife of one of his men while his men is out fighting. And we'll get more into that later in that particular the Hebrew surrounding the sin itself. However, the failure of the dereliction of duty, if you will, I think has two parts. It's failure of discipline and failure of identity. So, failure of discipline first. What is discipline? Jeez. Go ahead, Cass.
I would say a concentrated effort in a certain direction.
Yeah, it's a good definition. Winged Scribe and Lady Angrith simultaneously type almost the exact same thing. Go ahead, Ella.
Brain train, man.
I couldn't find that one other emote that everybody else uses to raise their hand, but that's close enough for me. Let's see. A discernment of oneself.
Not quite.
Dang it.
So when you look up discipline in dictionary.com, because apparently everybody uses that instead of Merriam-Webster now, whatever. It has a couple different definitions. One is trained to act in accordance with rules. So like military disciplines like drills. Number two is activity, exercise, or a regimen that develops or improves a skill. Number three is punishment inflicted by way of correction and training. The third one is the one we tend to think of when we think of discipline, and that's not what I mean here. What I mean more is the second one, the activity or exercise or regimen that develops or improves a skill, and what Winged Scribe and Lady Angrith said, the kind of doing what you're supposed to do even when you don't feel like it. Anybody here ever played like a sport in college or in high school? Or is anybody here? Question: is anybody here a musician?
Oh no, that I'm on board with.
You play 3 instruments, Mandraken. Go ahead, Cass.
I'm an artist.
That counts too. Okay, so Mandraken, do you practice for your instruments? I didn't think you were playing them all at once, but if you did, that'd be more impressive. When you were learning to play them, did you have to practice? If you wanted to be good. Yeah. Did you always feel like practicing? To get the A in the class, yes. Okay. So you wanted the result, but did you get amped about practicing? Like, whoa, I got to go practice my instrument today. Okay, cool. Good for you.
Okay, I'm sorry. So the practice was more about after I got older, it was harder to find time, but I still wanted the result, so I had to actually force myself to practice. Yeah.
There you go. Exactly. You wanted the result, so you had to force yourself to practice because it wasn't always easy to find time to practice. Okay, good. Kessa, you're a good artist. Did you have to practice to become that good, or were you just naturally a good artist?
I took 4 years of class, and I found that when I wasn't signed up for the class, I did not feel like getting up at 7 in the morning and drawing for 3 hours every Friday.
So would you say that took discipline to do that and to get good?
Yes.
Okay.
I did it because I enjoyed it, but yeah, at 7 in the morning, if I hadn't committed the night before to getting up and going to class, no, I would not have been there.
Exactly. Yeah. Lady Youngerth runs marathons. And she tells me that she does not look forward to practicing running for the marathons. Allegedly. Can't imagine why. I mean, it's a 20-mile practice run. Should be fine. No. But she enjoys running the marathon and being good at running, I'd imagine. I know I shoot competitively, and I was not a good shooter when I first started shooting competitively. I'm okay now. I have won some state titles. I've won some regional titles. But in order to get there, I have to get up an hour before work, sometimes at 5:30 in the morning, and practice with a handgun every weekday for an hour. I almost never feel like doing that. But like Mandraken said, the desire to be good and to win the titles and to shoot well, to be a good shooter, outweighs my my desire to not get up, my desire to sleep in, my desire to let it slide and not be disciplined. I have to remind myself, hey, like the result is going to be worth it here. So anybody who's tried to get good at something, I think understands this, and the discipline that's necessary to do what you have to do to get to that certain point. So David, I think here is letting the discipline slide, and this is something where I don't want to spend too much time on it, although we already have, because I haven't fully developed my thoughts on it yet. However, I do think that the Protestant Church has de-emphasized discipline a little too much. We talked just in Romans about how you're not saved by your works, and I totally agree with that. Obviously, it's in the Bible. However, I think as Protestants, sometimes we take that to mean that, okay, works are bad, or works have no value, or discipline has no value. And I don't think that's the case. I think discipline can keep us out of a lot of trouble. I'm reading a book right now called, or rereading, one of my favorite books called Gates of Fire. It's by Stephen Pressfield. It's about the Spartans. The Spartans talk a lot about how their training is about building habits. And their training sucks, and they don't even like their training. But it's about building habits. So in the moment of crisis, when it comes time to be brave or to cower in fear, you don't have to think. You automatically do what you've built the habit of. That's the point of the discipline for them, is to build habits of behavior. And I think that when you get up at 7 o'clock in the morning to draw or to play or to practice your instrument or to shoot or to run or whatever, what you're doing is you're building habits for yourself. You're building habits of how to hold the firearm, of how to draw a face, of how to blend colors together, of how to make the violin do what you want it to do. You're building these habits into your mind, into your behavior, so that way when it comes time to perform, you automatically do what's right and what's necessary, instead of having to sit there and think about it and struggle over it. I am not a good runner. I could not get up tomorrow and just decide I'm going to run a marathon. I haven't trained myself. I haven't built those muscles, haven't built those habits for myself. I would have to do that over a period of time before I did that. So when you start letting go on the discipline, you fall back into other patterns of behavior. So in from this sense, David begins to serve himself when he should be out fighting, serving his kingdom, serving his people, and that leads to problems, I believe. Second failure is a failure of identity. What is the king supposed to do? Go ahead, Kes.
Protect the people.
Protect the people. So there is actually a law of the king. I'm going to post it in the chat. You guys can read it later if you're interested. Deuteronomy 17 has a passage where God talks about when you guys get a king, this is what I want you to do. One of the things that the king is supposed to do is he's supposed to make himself a copy of the law. Well, that's interesting because the king has scribes who are supposed to write things down for him.
Yay.
Scribe is waving to everyone right now. So when the king writes down the law himself, what does that do? Well, it teaches him the law. He can't get away with saying, I didn't know that this was a thing I wasn't supposed to do. And he's supposed to write down the law so that he does not think of himself higher than his brothers. Now that's interesting, because the kings around Israel certainly would think of themselves as higher than their brothers. We've seen in other places in the Bible, like in Romans, now it's obviously later, but still same God, where how the government is supposed to protect the people from evil, right? So if David's at war with the people around him, he should be out trying to protect his land by fighting that war, not sitting in the palace looking out over his kingdom thinking, man, it's good to be king. So it's a failure of identity because he forgets or he doesn't have the right understanding of what he's supposed to be doing. He's supposed to serve God and serve the people. So is he being a good leader by sending his men off to war without him? Not a trick question. No. Oh, go ahead, Kes.
I was just going to ask how many management books is that tactic recommended in?
It's called delegation. No, no, it's he's not being a good leader at all. I mean, this is the guy who we think of as like kind of the archetypal warrior poet, and he's shirking his duty to go to war, right? It's like you've got one job. No, he's not going to war when that's what he's supposed to do. I mean, that's literally the etymology of the word, what kings do, and he's not going off to war, and so he's sending his men out to do it for him. Okay. Instead, he's staying in Jerusalem. While he's staying in Jerusalem, he rises from his couch, so he's laying down and just kind of chilling out, and is walking the roof of the king's house, and he saw from the roof a woman bathing. Verse 2. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent and inquired about the woman, and one said, "Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" Uriah the Hittite is one of David's captains, he's one of his men. One of the guys who's out fighting, doing David's job right now. So David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. Now she had been purified herself from uncleanness. Then she returned to her house. The woman conceived, and she sent to David and said, "I'm pregnant." Okay. So David sees the woman, he desires the woman, he takes the woman. Then when he finds out, we'll read in a couple of verses here, that she's pregnant, he attempts to hide this. Are those words we've heard anywhere else in the Old Testament? Yeah. Man, you guys are on point tonight. Genesis 3, exactly. Where in Genesis 3? Obviously, you think you guys know, but So we're going. We're just gonna put the pregnancy test off the side for now. So how does this echo Genesis 3? This language here with David and Bathsheba. Genesis 3, for those who don't know, is the story of Adam and Eve taking the fruit from the forbidden tree. Yeah. Yeah, in fact, the specific words used are used from Genesis. Now, there's a concept in the Old Testament that's a form of Hebrew narrative where you use certain words and phrases to call back to other parts in the story. And then something will change to either highlight a different portion or it'll be the same to drive home a point. The modern concept is called design patterns. I first encountered it from the guys from the Bible Project on their podcast. They have a 4-part series on design patterns. Really interesting. But this is one of those points. So the words and phrases used here, they sound a little odd in the syntax. Well, that's because they're calling back to Genesis. So in verse 2 of 2 Samuel chapter 11, David saw from the roof a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. So he sends inquired, and he sent messengers and took her, and she came to him. Now, that's an odd series. What he sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. It doesn't make any sense. The took there is specifically designed to call back to Genesis 3. And then after he takes her and they find this out, then they hide. Well, if you look in Genesis 3, verses 6 through 10, you'll see the same pattern. So the woman saw the tree was good for food, and it was a delight to the eyes. One could even say it was beautiful. Now the tree was desired to make one wise, and she took its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. And the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths. They heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. So, same thing here. So why would this be mirrored? Why would the author of 2 Samuel, I can't talk about it. Why would the author of 2 Samuel want to call us back to this passage in Genesis? What's it trying to get across? Yeah, mistakes are made. Yep, sin leads to death, and this leads to a law of death. A whole civil war, in fact. Spoiler alert. Yeah, that's a good point, man. What was the motivation for the sin in Genesis? Go ahead, Kess.
The belief that what they had wasn't enough, that God was holding out on said.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Winged.
I was gonna say was there just one? I count at least 3. You actually read about them in the New Testament. They're referred to as the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. Because Eve saw that the fruit was pleasing to look at, and it was good for sustenance, and yes, and and in her pride of being told that she would become like God if she ate of it, there's your threefold allure.
Yep. Exactly. Can be boiled down to just pride, the feeling that I'm going to do it my way, not God's way, because God's way is not good enough. Which is the core of sin, right? Well, that's exactly what David's doing here. He ignored who he answered to. He ignored what he was called to do. He wanted to be his own God. He saw that Bathsheba was beautiful. He wanted Bathsheba. So he took Bathsheba. And then he hid. No, you're absolutely right, Reagan. It is all three elements repeated here too. Yep, and that's part of the reason behind the reference, the design pattern, to use a technical term. So the that obviously well, let's move on first before we go to that. Nice doctor trying to get in there. So let's go on and see the immediate results of this. We won't get into the full results because we don't have all month. We just have tonight. In verses 7 through was lost my place. 7 through 17. Can I have a volunteer to read that?
What exactly were the verses again?
7 through 17.
I can take it.
Go ahead.
When Uriah came to him, David asked how Joab was doing, and how the people were doing, and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, Go down to your house and wash your feet. And Uriah went out of the king's house, and there followed him a present from the king. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of his lord, and did not go down to his house. When they told David Uriah did not go down to his house, David said to Uriah, Have you not come from a journey? Why did you not go down to your house? Uriah said to David, The ark and Israel and Judah dwell in booths, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are camping in the open field. Shall I then go to my house to eat and to drink and to lie with my wife? As you live and as your soul lives, I will not do this thing. Then David said to Uriah, Remain here today also, and tomorrow I will send you back. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. And David invited him, and he ate in his presence and drank, so that he made him drunk. And in the evening he went out to lie on his couch with the servants of his lord, but he did not go down to his house. In the morning David wrote a letter to Joab, and sent it by the hand of Uriah. In the letter he wrote, Set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fight, and then draw back from him, that he may be struck down and die. And as Joab was besieging the city, he assigned Uriah to the place where he knew there were valiant men. And the men of the city came out and fought with Joab, and some of the servants of David fell among the people fell. Uriah the Hittite also.
Thank you. Okay, so you guys in the chat are understanding that David is trying to cover things up here. What's he trying to do? What's he trying to accomplish by recalling Uriah from the front? Yeah. He recalls the guy from the front, hasn't given a report, and goes, okay, go home. Thinking, okay, Uriah's been gone from home for a month or so. Logical thing is, he'll go home, sleep with his wife. Then everybody will think that the baby is his. No problem. Except there's a problem. And what's the problem? Go ahead, watch.
Uriah is an excellent leader and doesn't want to do anything his men can't do.
Exactly. Uriah is doing David's job better than David. Remember, the Hebrew word for war is literally what kings do. So when kings do what kings do, David didn't. And you have Uriah, who is one of David's servants, is the term used here, one of his soldiers, one of his captains, sergeants, NCOs, whatever. Uriah is, it realizes, I'm not going to use my position to benefit myself. I want to stay, I don't want to take privileges that my men don't have right now. My men are out fighting and dying for Israel. I don't have any right going home and, returning to the comfort of my loved one's embrace. I want to get back in the field as fast as I can because that's the right thing to do. So Uriah is being disciplined. Uriah is being a servant. Uriah understands the identity he's supposed to have. He's doing David's job better than him. So David then goes, okay, great. Let's get him drunk. That'll work. And it doesn't work. Uriah gets drunk, but the habits that he's built keep him from going home and enjoying the comforts of home while his men are still out in the field. So what does David then choose to do?
Murder most foul.
Yeah. He murders him. So he tells Joab, who's not a great, outstanding character in these stories, by the way, basically to set it up so that Uriah dies. And not just Uriah dies, but a lot of people die. If you keep reading, in fact, there's a slew of casualties from a haphazard attack on a wall. And David kind of says, well, what happened? Like, what? This was a bad idea. Who ordered this? And then Joab's like, yeah, Uriah also died. And David's like, oh, these things happen. Sometimes attacks go bad. And so not just Uriah dies, but several other loyal soldiers die as well. He takes the trivia out of Trivia Murder Party. Yeah, also true, Kessa. So this, and again, I really encourage you guys, if you haven't, to read the book of 2 Samuel. There's a lot of politics and intrigue and battles, and there's all sorts of good, interesting stuff. It reads like a thriller. But in this right here, Joab is enabling David, and Uriah gets killed because Uriah is doing the right thing. Now, David will get called out for this. David will repent of this, and David will pay very dearly for this. Tenfold, in fact, which we talked about in the 2 Samuel study as well, but literally tenfold. So there's consequences for this, but in this particular story, the way this is written, the righteousness of Uriah is made to contrast David's failure here. So 3-part failure: failure of discipline, failure of identity, failure of pride and lust, and the threefold part of the fall. So we read this and we say, whew, that's pretty messed up. David was a bad dude. Okay, but let's remember, this is obviously a bad thing. Murdering your friends because you slept with their wives is a bad thing. I think we're all on the same page on that. But you gotta remember, David is considered one of the best characters, if you will, the most righteous men in the Old Testament. Remember, he's a warrior poet. He's chosen by God, God's chosen king, a man after God's own heart, conqueror of Israel, protector of Israel. How did he fall so far? If corruptio optima pessima, corruption of the best is the worst. That's like using that Latin phrase, sorry. If corruption of the best is the worst, how did this happen? How did he get corrupted? And how can we avoid that in our lives? Because we're certainly I I don't think of myself as one of the pillars of the faith like David was. I certainly haven't, conquered and then protected Israel. I don't think of myself as I don't have the title from God, the man after God's own heart. And yet, David fell this far. So, how much farther could I fall? How do we avoid going down that path? What can we learn from this story? Is the kind of the closeout question I have for you guys. What do we take away from this week? Okay, Mandraken says, guard your house so we not get corrupted. So I'm not disagreeing with that, but I'm going to press for an answer on that because people say that a lot in the church, and it's a little unclear. What does it mean to guard your heart? Well, Mandraken is typing or thinking about that. I'll call on Kessa. Go ahead, Kessa.
I think another way of looking at this is that it's David was doing something that most of us do all the time, but he was in a position to cause a unique amount of damage. I mean, I fail epically multiple times a week. It's just that I'm not running a kingdom.
That's a good point. Yeah. And that is something to think about when we look at, especially in America, it's kind of a national pastime to take great pleasure in the fall and the sins of people who have a lot of power or money or authority. But let's not forget, these people are regular, simple people just like us. And perhaps the reason why we haven't fallen so far is because we don't have that authority. Perhaps we wouldn't do any better. Maybe we'd even do worse in their situations. A little humility in some of these situations would be a good thing. Mandraken is answering my question saying, what does it mean to guard your heart? Avoid areas in which you are weak. Okay, that's an answer. Yep. Go ahead, Winged.
I think we need to pay attention to something that was mentioned pretty early in this study. Particularly noted was the whole idea of Deuteronomy 17. A wise person a long time ago told me or gave me a phrase, and I haven't forgotten it. They said, God's word will keep you from sin, or sin will keep you from God's word. And if David had been paying attention to the law as he should have, if he had been keeping that in mind according to all the things that he was doing, it's like, yeah, we can guard our heart, but how do you guard your heart? David wrote Psalm 119, which is this glorious epic written on the nature of the Word of God. And I feel like this, I'm not entirely sure when he wrote it in the course of his life, but I wonder if it wasn't after this event, because it was when he recognized just what God's Word is so useful and how when he missed out on it, it led him so far astray.
Some interesting discussion going on in the chat.
I was going to say, it got real quiet in here. Was everything all right?
No, I agree with you. I'm kind of pondering some of these things that are going on in the chat too. This is a good discussion. Yeah. Because I think there's like this idea that we should avoid doing evil, which we should. But it's a lot. I don't know. If David had been out doing good, right, doing what he should be doing, that is by default, he wouldn't be here in this situation. So obviously, it's a big part of the story. We should be out doing what we should. Now, Kessa is right as well. We'll never be doing what we should be doing all the time. This isn't gonna happen. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try. I do think that's where discipline comes in. But yeah, we also need to have humility to be able to see what we're doing and to correct our mistakes and not go farther down that path. Because David has a couple of mistakes here, right? questionable as to if the if the staying home from war is a sin or not. Certainly a dereliction of duty, a failure of leadership. Then he goes and sends for Bathsheba and sleeps with Bathsheba, definitely a sin. Then he goes and tries to cover it up, also a sin. Then he kills a guy and a bunch of other people trying to cover it up, also a sin. And he keeps making excuses for himself down this path, right? Because we're never the bad guys in our own minds. We always find ways to justify and try and cover up what we did. But his sin is leading to more sin. And it's not until someone calls him out in later chapters that he realizes what he's done and turns around. But if he had stopped that early, if he had the humility to realize what he was doing earlier, maybe he wouldn't have gone so far down that path. Winged is definitely right, and those of you guys who are in the chat about the if he had been doing the Deuteronomy 17 thing as well, studying the word would have kept him out of this trouble, because that's why I brought that up. I think that that's a huge part of this whole incident as well. What else? What else can we learn from this? How can we avoid going down that path? Yeah, Nathan, Mario, exactly. There's a fine line between not reading and not caring, Lush.
Gotcha. It was a serious question. I was wondering if it was written before Solomon or after.
Deuteronomy is generally accepted to have been written in the time of Moses, so quite a ways before.
No worries, Mario. Go ahead, Cass.
I just reiterate, I really don't think there's a point at which any of us can say, hey, I know if I'm wise enough, I'm safe now. I'm never going to mess up at that level.
Yeah.
We're never going to be immune. We always need to be in fear of this. And, there is no guarantee that we won't mess up like this. If David, who was a man after God's own heart, messed up this badly, how can any of us think that we can take steps A, B, and C, and there we're good, we're safe?
Yeah, very good point. That ties into that humility part, right? Because this for David is the height of his power. I always say, what's the most dangerous shooting match to go to? It's the one that you go to right after you just won a big one. Because you're cocky, you haven't been practicing, you've let your foot off the gas a little bit because you're like, I'm pretty good at this. And you go out there and you get smoked. So likewise, if we think, okay, we've got it dialed in, we've got the formula, I'm not going to fall like David did, that's a pretty dangerous time for us. Just have some good stuff in the chat. I'm going to pull out just 3 takeaways I took away from this. These are not waterproof methods for avoiding sin, but they, I think, are at least principles that we can draw from this that may help us. So, number 1, remain disciplined in doing good. Or as Paul would say, do not grow tired of doing good. Do it even when you don't feel like it. there's this idea in the church for some reason that if we don't feel like praying at a daily time, we shouldn't pray. We have to feel like we should pray. Or if we don't feel like reading our Bible, we shouldn't do it. We have to feel like we should do it. Or if we can't find time. I I call garbage on that because I know that there's other things in my life that because they're important, because they're important to me to do well in, I'll do it whether I feel like doing it or not. I mentioned the competition shooting thing. I had the privilege of one time training with one of the world champions in my discipline of competition shooting. Somebody asked him, somebody said to him, I can never find time to practice. How do you find time to practice? He goes, if you're looking for time to practice, you're never going to find time. You've already failed because you have to make time because you have to decide it's important. So you have to do it whether you feel like it or not and move things around it. Oh, okay. It was a wake-up moment for me. But this is a guy who's, shot in our version of the Olympics against multiple other countries, against the best shooters in the world, and has won. That's what it took for him to do it. And he didn't always feel like it, but he made time to do it. So I think that same for us for doing good. We should take our study of the Bible, our prayer life, the spiritual disciplines, if you will, seriously. We should do them whether we feel like them or not, because we understand that they're important for our relationship with God. We're not saved by them. Totally get that. And they're not going to keep us from sin. But I do think that they have value. And just like any other relationship that needs to be fostered deliberately, our relationship with God does as well. So, number one, be disciplined about doing good. Number two, have a good understanding of our identity and what we're supposed to do. Some elements of our identity as Christians. We're sons and daughters of God, right? I mentioned the sons of God. Men and women are both sons of God in Romans because that's the sons are the ones that had the property rights, the heir rights, if you will. So I say I'm not being sexist. I'm just using the original language because that was what the people at the time, that was the people with the rights were the sons. So when Paul says that both men and women are sons of God, it means you all have rights of inheritance, rights to the kingdom. So we need to understand that. We need to understand our purpose here on earth is not to serve ourselves, to consolidate power for ourselves, but, like David's, to love God, to love others. Serve God, serve those around you. That's our purpose. That's what our goal should be. When we remember that, I think, that helps us stay disciplined. It helps us avoid evil. Will we still fall and fail? Yeah, of course. But I think this will help. At least it does with me. And number three, stay humble. This sin was led to, like the one in the Garden of Eden, by pride. And then it was persisted in by pride. David saying, I'm the one in charge. I'm going to do what I want to serve me. That's pride. It happens to us all the time. Even thinking, well, this would never happen to me. I would never sleep with my friend's wife and then get my friend killed. That's pride. Okay? So pride is not, it's thinking too highly of yourself. Some have made the case that insecurity, thinking too lowly of yourself, is also pride because you're thinking of yourself more than you ought to, and focusing on yourself when the focus of your existence should not be on yourself, but on God. So stay humble, be willing to see potential problems with yourself, temptations, things that you're weak in. And remember that God's way is what we're called to follow and is what's best, not what we think is expedient or what we want. So stay disciplined. Be sure and secure in your identity. Stay humble would be the three principles I would draw from this. Now, again, not watertight for avoiding sin. However, that's I think what I would take away from this. There's a lot of good stuff in the chat that I'm having when I was talking. Kessa raised her hand. Go ahead, Kessa.
It's been important for me to realize that God actually does love me even when I mess up, that his love for me preceded me doing anything in reaction to grace. I still have a lot of trouble wrapping my mind around that, but it's very motivating.
And that's a good point too. Okay, So that ties into the fourth point, which I wanted to mention but forgot to put in my notes. That if something like that in David's life when this happened, we look at that and go, I ain't trusting that guy again. Like, he's dead to me. He got his friend killed and slept with his wife. And yet, he is still considered, after this, a man after God's own heart. And it's still the standard at which other kings are judged against and found wanting later in the book of Kings and First and Second Kings and First and Second Chronicles, which tells you something about the character of the kings that we're dealing with. But also shows, I think, the power of redemption, because God does restore David. Now, David falls hard after this. In fact, the kingdom falls. But God restores David to a position of power in the kingdom as well, because David does repent, asks God for forgiveness, and returns to a relationship with God. So God's love is, like Hessa said, not based on our performance, and precedes any cleaning up he does in our lives. He does, not we do. He does in our lives. And that's part of our identity too, right? We can go have the courage to do good because we know that God loves us even when we fail. Good stuff. Anything else from this that you guys want to pull up before we close out in prayer? Go ahead, Cass.
I don't mean to be hogging the airspace. If anybody else wants to talk, please raise your hand. Okay, well, along with the remain disciplined in reading Bible and praying, I would say also do it badly. Sometimes we make the perfect the enemy of the good.
Yes.
Like, if we don't have an hour for it, we won't take 5 minutes for it. No, we'll wait until we have time, etc. Just do it badly.
That's so true. And anybody, this ties into the whole thing with any sort of discipline, whether that be music or sports or what have you. Anybody who's trying to get good at something will tell you that half a practice session is better than no practice session, if you will. And what you'll find is it gets easier once you start doing it. So you may not feel like reading your Bible, but if you make a couple minutes for it, maybe you get to the end of the couple minutes and then you're done. Or maybe you get to the end of the 5 minutes and you feel like reading for an hour 5, or you wind up reading for an hour 5 because it's really interesting or really speaking to you or what have you. That's what happens to me for prayer, for Bible reading, for competition shooting. But it is what happens when you're disciplined. And beyond just the natural cause of discipline being a reward in itself, I do think also sometimes that's God's way of encouraging us in the small steps that we're taking too, right? I've found so much insight in just some short, I'm going to make time today, even though I don't feel like it, to read for 5 minutes. I'll be struck by something that applies from that exactly to what I'm dealing with, and changes kind of the trajectory of my day or my week or what have you. And I think that's God kind of supporting us in and drawing us closer to Him through that. Yeah, exactly. Lady Ongerth's dad is a pastor, and has a lot of good lines. But one of his lines that he said that I thought really struck me was, "God knows it's difficult to be human." So God knows it's difficult, I think, sometimes to resist temptation and to to be disciplined, to remember identity and whatnot. God knows that. Now, God's still just, but He's also merciful. And I think God is pleased by those times when we, even though we don't feel like it, we make time to pray, even though we don't feel like it, to read your Bible. And a lot of times I think we'll shirk from that duty because we go, I don't feel like it, I feel bad about not feeling like it, so let's avoid it. But it's not something to be ashamed of, that we don't feel like it. It's just if, like C.S. Lewis says, we can't get the rest of it up. A lot of times, if you take an action, your emotions will fall in line after you start taking that course of action. So don't feel bad about how you may feel about something. Just do the right thing, and you'll find yourself feeling better about it, if you will. So I do think again that we don't need to feel bad about that, because God knows that it is difficult to be human. Yeah. And he knows it just not in the hypothetical sense, but in the actual, he experienced this sense. Not Chesterton. Oh, lies, all lies. Okay. Anything else on this before we close out? We did go over. My apologies to football. Sometimes it's tough to tell what's a Sayers quote versus a Chesterton quote versus a Lewis quote.
So Chesterton and Lewis say the same things? Is that what you're saying, Describe?
I mean, Chesterton is widely acknowledged as one of Lewis's inspirations, I guess you could say.
I will mute every last one of you.
Lewis said that Chesterton's book, The Everlasting Man, was the first interpretation of history that made sense to him. Regardless. All right, we have gone over. Let's close out in prayer.